We're going to go to the book of Esther. I'm going to talk to y'all about Esther today. Y'all know where the book of Ezra is? Book of Nehemiah? No. Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. How about that? Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. It's before Psalms, before Job. Right before Job. Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes.
We're going to Esther.
We're going to the book of Esther.
The planning and placing principles.
So the book of Esther,
Planting and
Esther.
placing.
The book of Esther. I'm going to talk to you about the whole book today. Okay, so put your seatbelts on, get your snacks out.
Planting and
The book of Esther takes place over a 9-year span, according to history. And the book of Esther is the 17th book in your Bible, and it fits with Genesis chapter 2, verse 8. It's the planting and placing principle. So God planted, huh?
an apple of understanding.
And yes, and so God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there He placed the man. He planted the garden, and then He placed the man in the garden. So if God placed the man into the garden, where was the man created? Huh?
Out in space, I don't know.
Outside the garden. So Esther teaches us about the planting and placing principle. So the garden was planted, and then the man was placed into the garden. And so I'm going to tell you about the story of Esther. And so I'm in chapter 1 and verse 1. And the Bible says, "Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, that this Ahasuerus, which reigned from India even to Ethiopia, over 127 provinces." So the king of the kingdom here, he reigned all the way from India unto Ethiopia. Go for it, Vale. And so this is the Persian kingdom. Is she ignoring you? She asked for a blanket and you gave her what?
She asked for a blanket and I gave her an ink pen.
An ink pen. Okay, that's close.
I know, I'm in this.
They're in the same house. So this is talking about the kingdom of Persia, which is basically modern day Iran. So the king reigned in the kingdom of Persia, but it was all the way from India to Ethiopia. Now, that's the geographical area. So if you know where India is, then it's east of Israel, and it's east of Iran and Iraq and all that, and it goes all the way over to the northern top of the continent of Africa. And so this was a big place. His father, the king's father, had conquered all of this place, and then when he had passed, his son inherited the reign, and there was 127 provinces. Now we have 50 states in the United States. This guy ruled over 127 provinces. Big. It's equal, yes. And so, not necessarily in geography, but that's the picture in today's world. So he reigned over 127 provinces. Verse 2. That in those days, when the king Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan, the palace. So Shushan was the city that was the headquarters city, that was the
Kind
capital.
of like the capital.
And that's where his throne was. And today Shushan is in western Iran. In the 3rd year of his reign, look here, he made a feast unto all his princes and his servants, the power of Persia and Media, the nobles and princes of the provinces being before him. When he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty many days, look here, even 180 days. How many days is that? 80.
We don't know. Tell us.
A score is 20. 180. This is a 180-day party. That's about 6 months, isn't it? So this is a 6-month party. And when those days were expired, the 180 days, the king made a feast unto all the people that were present in Shushan, the palace, both unto great and small, 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace, where were white, green, and blue hangings, fastened with cords of fine linen and purple, to silver rings and pillars of marble. The beds were of gold and silver, upon a pavement of red and blue and white and black marble.
But that's pretty.
This is a fancy place. So he gave a 180-day party for all of his leaders, all of his governors and princes, and that was people that was outside of Shushan. And then once the 6-month party was over, he had another 7 days for those people that were there and served and worked while the big party was going on. 7. And they gave them a drink in vessels of gold, the vessels being a diverse one from another, and royal wine in abundance, according to the state of the king. And the drinking was according to the law. None did compel. You wasn't forced. For so too the king had appointed to all the officers of his house that they should do according to every man's pleasure. Whoa. You don't give them all the wine they can drink and tell them they do whatever they want?
And have all their pleasures, whatever it was, in your house.
Absolutely not.
That's what he did. He
Even
was
with,
in his castle.
even with marble floors.
Yeah. And then gave them gold things to drink out of and all the wine they want. And it was not cheap wine, it was the good wine.
Well, you're slacking.
I have to agree. 'Cause boy, I cry.
Verse 9. Also, Vashti, the queen, made a feast for the women in the royal house which belonged to King Ahasuerus.
Man, she gave one just to the women.
Just for the women.
So they were separated, so.
Oh, so the men
Oh,
can't.
amen.
So the,
So the men can't drink then. They separated. Well, wasn't that nice back in those days? 'Cause you know
so
were
what if
awful
they?
rich.
And what if they want? Never mind.
Well, that is-
Verse 10.
They were awful rich. They were back in the olden days. They did it like it was nothing. The way you said it.
Verse 10. On the 7th day, this is of the 7-day feast, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, in other words, he's drunk, he commanded Mehumam, Bitztha, Harbonah, Bigtha, and Abitha, Zahar, and Karsus. That will be on the quiz afterwards.
The 7 chamberlains.
The 7 chamberlains that served in the presence of Ahasuerus, the king, to bring Vashti, the queen, before the king with the crown royal. Bring her in here with her crown on, to show the people and the princes her beauty, for she was fair to look upon, to look on. 12. But the king Vashti refused to come in at the king's commandment by his chamberlains. Therefore was the king very wroth, and his anger burned in him.
This is where he got rid of his first wife.
That's where he got rid of his first wife. This is his first
And
wife.
this is what then he gets Esther.
And so he's been drinking and partying for 180 days. For people out,
Plus 7 plus more.
this is for all the people out in the 127 provinces. Now, if you study history, you'll see that when his father died, his father was planning a military excursion into Greece, to conquer Greece, which would have been to the west of where he was. And he wasn't happy with the 127 provinces. So in 127 provinces, spanning all the way from India to Ethiopia, there's many tongues and languages. And so he had to have, to do this, to conquer Greece, which was the big kingdom at the time, he had to have all these 127 provinces support. He had to have their money, he had to have their soldiers, and he had to have their chariots, their horses, and all of that. He had to have they had to be behind him to make this big journey and conquer Greece. And so he brought them all in. This was not just a drunken party, although I'm sure that's what it was.
I'm sure, but you said he called in all the other kings and so forth.
All the other provinces,
Yeah, all the other
the
provinces.
leaders,
Right,
and this was a planning session.
yeah. So he
They
had
spent
their
6
money
months.
support.
He took 6 months, wooing them, and he showed all of his riches. Like he spent it was a 180-day party of pride. Look at all the power I got. Look how big I am. Look at everything I have. Now I need your support because I'm going to go to Greece and we're going to make this thing even bigger. Now, you know, my dad was planning this, and then he died before it happened. And so after 180 days, then he has for the local help and, you know, appreciation party. And they spend 7 days getting drunk and carrying on, talking about how great they are. Don't ever plan anything when you're drinking. And at the end of the 7 days, he's all puffed up. He said, I've got a beautiful thing to show you. Now this woman is hot.
And then she would come in there.
And he sent 7 of his chamberlains. You know what a chamberlain is? A chamberlain is the men who were responsible for overseeing the female workforce in the palace, but they had been castrated. A chamberlain is a eunuch. Why did they do that?
So they wouldn't screw on them.
So they didn't have to worry about that. And so these 7 chamberlains, not just one, but 7 of them go over and say, hey, look, your husband wants to show you off. Put on your best stuff and put your crown on your head and come on in here. He's going to show you off to everybody. No? You got an issue with that, Mom?
Nope.
And so there was nothing illegal about what he was asking her to do at that point. But she refused. She said, no, I am not going in that room. That man's been drinking for 6 months and a week.
Oh, no. Yeah, honestly. I don't know if he's a happy drunk, an angry drunk, or a dumb drunk, but I ain't going.
So she says, I'm not going. And the queen refuses. And so the king calls in all of his counselors, and he's like, what are we going to do with this woman? She is refusing to do what I ask her. And one of them jumped up, and he's like, look, let me tell you something. If you don't confront that, now he loved her. He thought she was the most beautiful thing in the kingdom. He was going to show her off to everybody. But this guy jumps up, and he's like, let me tell you something. If you don't do something, and the word gets out, all the men are going to have a problem.
With the women. 'Cause none
Oh,
of them-
my God. It's going to be a woman drag. If one man stands up to us,
That's
they
right.
all
Yeah.
stand up to us. And they outnumber us 100 to 1. But it's like that's what they can't say to the crickets.
So he took their advice and dropped down to verse 19.
19?
Chapter 1:19. If it please the king, let there go a royal commandment from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, that it be not altered, that Vashti come no more before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal estate unto another that is better than she.
What did she say?
Figure out.
He divorced her
Because she refused.
because she refused to come in and show her beauty to everybody for him.
So he divorced.
But really, it
divorced
was
her.
because she didn't bow down and do what he was. In other words, she did not do what she was ordered to do.
Exactly.
Which what she was ordered to do was not wrong.
No.
Well,
And
was
then-
it back in this day that acceptable divorce like that because of the hardness of her heart, which is what Moses
Yes.
allowed?
Exactly.
So it was okay to divorce back then?
because of the hardness of their heart. And besides that, this is the Persian kingdom. This is not Jews. This is not Hebrews. This is a foreign country. At this point, the Hebrew children, the Jews, have been in captivity for about 100 years. They were carried away into captivity. In other words, like Canada come and took all of America and took a bunch of us up to Canada and made us live up there.
But I'm trying to figure out if this is the prettiest woman you've ever seen, because she defiled you and didn't do what you said. You divorced her, giving her the right to go marry another man.
Well, because he was saying otherwise it would set a precedence.
Exactly.
Yeah, so what you do is go in there and say, get in here. Like, you personally go ask.
No, she wasn't, she wasn't counting.
Well, the big issue is this is not 2024 that this happened.
That's true, and that's what I'm bringing combination. Maybe she's cranky.
Maybe she's what?
Maybe she's a cranky lady. She could have been crazy. She could have been cranky.
Well, she stood up to the king.
Not everyone has looked
So when he divorced her and then he did all that, then he said that all women shall obey their husbands from there on out,
So he divorced her, and he sends out a letter to all 127 provinces
both big and small,
that the women will do what their husbands say.
both great and
Oh,
small.
he did it. So he's the one who set that precedent. Laura, I need to go there.
All right, go down to chapter 2, verse 1. After these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus was appeased, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what was decreed against her. What was decreed against her? He remembered her. See, he was in love with her.
Well, he thought she was beautiful.
He was in love for her, but because of his public persona, his public reputation, he divorced her.
Well, for, like you said, for making a statement.
Right. Verse 2. Then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, let there be fair young virgins sought for the king. So his counselors said, let's have a beauty show.
Yep, and he sent them from all provinces.
And bring in the virgins from all the provinces, and we'll house them over here and give them the things for their purification. Now they had these women, there were certain salves and certain smells and certain flowers they had to bathe with, and they had to sleep with all this stuff to make them beautiful, and
They had to be virgins too.
and they had to be virgins, and so they were kept up for 12 months. And that after 12 months, the king would say, "Okay, send me that one."
For a whole year?
For a whole year. I told you this took place over 9 years. For a whole year. And then he would bring one in, and she would spend the night with him. And then after she left, the next morning, she was sent out to a second house. She didn't go back to where she came from. And she was no longer considered a virgin. She was considered the king's concubine.
Oh, no.
So he took her
Why would
virginity
he-
and
Yes.
then kicked her out?
Yes. This
What
is
kind of rock
this
is
is
this?
not a godly man.
No.
I don't like it. Wow.
He's drinking.
They did it for 6 months and a week.
Then they went to a second house. They didn't go back, and they stayed in that second house and were taken care of the rest of their life, except for when the king sent them. Then they had to go back in and be a concubine.
So he had one per month, right?
Oh, I don't know. They don't say. He could have had one per night.
How many
But it said it went
127 provinces.
127 women. So the thing is he had
Oh, so he only had one per province.
They don't say that. It says they came from all the provinces.
Right, so there could have been 10 in
Could have been.
one province.
So the thing is but he kept them and protected them. But what if he wanted number 12 or he wanted number 127 back for that night? How did he know by their names? I mean, how did he know?
He kept a ledger. They taught that for our records.
The little black book.
I mean,
But he had to send for them. He could not like text and whatever. You know what I'm saying? He had to
He probably
send.
was like 127. He was probably just like, bring me a small redhead. You
No,
know?
he has to remember which one.
Yes.
Are you saying that he was kind of taking on a test drive, and if he knew he didn't want him as a queen, but he didn't want him as a concubine, then he would take care of him as a mentor?
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
So he didn't choose them for his wife.
What'd she say?
We can't hear you.
Yeah, and you're cutting out.
I said if he wanted to, if he thought that the woman he met might be, his future queen, would he not sleep with her and like put her on a different place?
No, ma'am.
No. He was trying to find a wife, but he just had each one. Instead made concubine. Like if he found one that had too big of hips, he didn't like her. Or he
If they
had
didn't
one
become
that
a
was not
wife.
big enough hips.
If they didn't become a wife, they became concubine.
Right.
And you know, he would send for
A
the
concubine.
And then he would send for him periodically as a concubine.
A concubine serves as a wife, but she doesn't get the name.
So that's when Esther comes into the picture. Do you like Esther?
Verse 5.
She's a Jew.
Chapter 2, verse 5.
It's she's wonderful and beautiful.
Now in Shushan, the palace there, was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai,
Mordecai.
the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity, which had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And he brought up Hashdashah, that is Esther. So Hashdash that means in Hebrew means myrtle tree. So Esther is the feminine of the first name. Hashdiah was the male myrtle tree, but Esther is the female myrtle tree. That is Esther, his uncle's daughter. So she was she was an orphan. Her mom and dad were dead, and she was in captivity, and Mordecai was her uncle.
And he took care
No, I'm sorry. Mordecai was her cousin. Mordecai's dad and her dad were brothers.
Okay. So that was.
Mordecai was her cousin, but was much older.
Okay, wait a minute. If her dad and Mordecai were brothers,
Mordecai's dad and Esther's dad.
So they were a second cousin.
so down the line. Okay, gotcha. Okay.
And so Mordecai had raised her. Now, they've been in captivity for somewhere from 90 to 100 years at this point. So most of the generation that had been taken captive and knew about Israel and knew the Torah and all the religious things that the Hebrews did were dead. But Mordecai was an old man, and he still was able to teach Esther the ways of the Hebrew people. And so he was taking care of her. He raised her. She was an orphan. And so then let's continue on. Verse 8. So it came to pass when the king's commandment and his decree was heard, and when many maidens were gathered together unto Shushan the palace, to the custody of Haggai, that Esther was brought also unto the king's house to the custody of Haggai, keeper of the women. So she's one of the virgins being kept up and purified
Oh, she was.
for her visit with
Oh.
the king.
Was she in the house with all the other women?
Yes. But she's a Hebrew, and all the rest of them are, not all the rest of them, there could have been other Jewish women, but the majority of the rest of them are what you would consider heathen or not Jews. Verse 9. And the maiden pleased him, pleased the keeper of the women.
So Haggai, who the keeper of the women was, it says Haggai was the keeper of the women.
Noticed what Esther was.
Notice what Esther was, how beautiful she was, and what a sweet, kind, wonderful woman she was, okay?
Now she's in captivity, she's an orphan, and almost all of their religious history has been lost at this point.
Yeah, and they didn't like her.
And the maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness of him, and he speedily gave her things for purification, which such things as belonged to her, and 7 maidens. So she got everything that she needed to be taken care of, plus 7 servants.
All because the man that ran the house found favor.
She found favor in his eyes.
But did her virginity get broke too?
No, she's still in this house. over
Okay,
here.
so she's still over in the house with.
In the first house.
Yeah, she hasn't got moved to the.
Okay. So she had extra maids and she had all the,
Everything she needed.
and then she got soap and fancy clothes. Yeah, okay.
Does this remind you of another character in the Bible who was in prison,
Joseph
who found favor?
with the
The jailer, the prison keeper. She's in a foreign land. Her nation is just about gone. And she's locked up with a bunch of heathen waiting to go spend a night with the king. And she finds favor
And she finds favor with the warden.
and gets everything she needs, plus 7 servants.
And gave her the best place of the house of the women. He gave her the best room in the house.
Verse 10. Esther had not showed her people nor her kindred, for Mordecai had charged her that she should not show it, and not showed them that she was a Jew.
She had to not show her that she was a Jew.
They didn't know she was a Jew. And so she goes through the 12 months of purification down to verse 14. She gets called to the king. In the evening she went to the king, and on the morrow she returned into the second house of the women, to the custody of Shuashgaz, in other words, the guy over the second house, the king's chamberlain, which kept the concubines. She came in of the king no more, except the king delighted in her that she were called by name. 15. Now when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, Mordecai's uncle's daughter, her cousin, who had...
So he actually took her virginity and then sent her to the second house?
No, that was a different girl.
Yeah,
Okay.
he's not there. She just now got called.
Just now got called in.
Okay, so you're okay.
But they don't know she's a Jew.
They don't know she's a Jew?
No.
But do you know why? Did you know that you cannot be a Jew unless it's passed through the mother's descent?
Say again?
You can only be a Jew by mother. You cannot be a Jew by father.
He's supposed to be a Jew, but it comes through the mother.
So she is a Jew.
Right, meaning that he probably didn't want to sleep with Jews because that would carry on the bloodline because it was passed through the mother, not the father.
Yes.
Okay, see, okay.
16. So Esther was taken unto King Ahasuerus into his house, royal, in the 10th month of the year, which is the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. And the king loved Esther above all the women, as she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. So that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti.
So he thought she was
Now think
so
about it.
beautiful.
Her religion's gone.
She hid it.
And yet she's a Jew, and she's been taught by Mordecai. And she's going to go in and spend the night with a heathen king in a foreign land.
No, she did it.
And she's God's chosen people. That's what I'm saying.
That's not okay, is it?
Or a little king, you don't even know what you're about to do.
And he loved her so much, and he thought she was so
That's it.
beautiful.
She's it.
She's the one.
Okay, so she comes in and
And he-
immediately takes.
Yes.
He wants her. That's what he just said. He liked her so much, he put the crown on her head and said, she's the one. She's taken to Cleopa's place.
She was beautiful, body, soul, spirit, and mind.
Yeah. He liked her.
And he took her. Now she's gone in. She's in captivity. She's an orphan. She's been locked up. And yet she's going to go in to sleep with the king. And she's a Hebrew. Huh?
He's trying to shut him up.
And she's a Hebrew. And now, so what is the church going to do when somebody acts like that?
When what?
What's the church going to do when somebody acts like that?
Kick him out.
Say again? What's the church going to do with somebody like that? What are they going to do with somebody like Esther, a Hebrew who has gone through all this stuff, and now she's going to go spend a night with a ungodly king of a foreign land. Now the church is going to blow up, aren't they? Oh, you can't dress like that. You can't spend the night over there. You can't go over here. You got to believe this. You got to do that. Law after rule after regulation after demand. You got to act like this. You got to act like that, or we can't have fellowship. You're not going where I'm going. Thank God.
Dad,
Yes, ma'am.
if he had not done this, wouldn't the line of David be interrupted?
Oh, yeah.
So it would have been a period of Jesus Christ being born.
But she saved the Jews.
Shall we go on? So Esther's made queen. Esther's made queen, and then she goes back. She's made queen, and the king still doesn't know that she's a Hebrew. It's still not known. Now, go back to 19. And when the virgins were gathered together the second time, then Mordecai sat in the king's gate. Mordecai had a habit of going to the king's gate, and he would sit in the gate to the king's house because he was waiting to hear about how his cousin Mordecai was doing, the girl that he had raised as a child, from a child. And he would go sit in the gate, and then he would catch news of what the queen was doing, how Esther was doing. 20. Esther had not yet showed her kindred nor her people as Mordecai had charged her, for Esther did the commandment of Mordecai like as when she was brought up with him. And so Mordecai is sitting in the gate of the king's house, and he gets news from Queen Esther every once in a while. And while he's out there sitting in the gate to the kingdom, gate to the king's house, he hears a rumor that two of the king's chamberlains, two of his eunuchs, who were responsible for guarding his door, were plotting to kill him because they didn't like him.
Plotting to kill the king.
Plotting to kill the king.
Well, if you're lucky, all of them will do that.
Especially the women, huh? So Mordecai gets word to Esther that something's going on, and Esther comes to talk to Mordecai, and he tells Esther, this is what's going on. You better go tell the king. So Esther goes back in there and asks for an audience with her husband, and she tells the king what's going on. And so the king investigates it, and come to find out it's fact, it's truth. These two guys are plotting to kill him. So he has these two guys executed. And then it's written down in the daily journal of the court. This is what happened today, and this is who did it. And Mordecai just got looked over. Nobody ever sent him a thank you card. Nobody ever emailed him. None of that.
But they didn't know he's the one that told them.
Yes, Esther told him.
Oh,
Esther told the king, this is what Mordecai's hearing. And it was wrote in the journal of the court that Mordecai told Esther, and Esther told the king, and we investigated, and they were executed. So Mordecai, every day, he goes back and sits in the king's at the gate to the king's house. And so there was a heathen guy by the name of Haman, 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 and the king took him and promoted him. The king promoted him and made him second in the kingdom. And so there was a rule, there was a law that every time Haman come down the street, that you had to do obeisance to the king. To Haman.
you had to bow down.
You had to bow down to him. And Mordecai said, I'm not bound down to him. He's not my Christ. And so that made Haman mad. And so Haman's plotting to get him. And so he goes to the king and is complaining, about this guy. He never tells him it's Mordecai. And at this point, the king's already disconnected Mordecai from what's going on out here. He's forgotten about Mordecai. He's a busy man, apparently. And so then Haman goes back out again, and Haman refuses to bow to him. And so Haman talks the king into passing a law that on a certain day in the future, all Jewish people in the kingdom are going to be executed. Men, women, children, babies, young, old, whole and invalids. They're going to all be executed because they have a law and they're not subject to the king. It's the same thing that they accused Jesus with. And so Haman cast lots. It's like rolling the dice. He's casting lots to find out what day that this law needs to go into effect. And so the lot falls on a certain day that is almost a year in advance. And the king writes the law. He sends it out by mail to all 127 provinces. And he still doesn't know that his wife that he's so in love with is a Jew. So, which would include her in the execution. So Mordecai hears about this letter and he tells Esther, he's like, we got a problem. This is what's going on. And he told Esther, he said, look, well, let me see if I can find that verse first. He told Esther, he said, we've got to do something about this. And Esther's like, now there's a law that nobody can just walk into the king's court. He has to bid for you to come in. He has to send you an invitation. If you show up without an invitation and he doesn't accept you, you're executed on the spot. In other words, I can carry the message to him, but it's going to cost me my life. And so Mordecai says to her in chapter 4, verse 14. Chapter 4, verse 14. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this?
Ooh, that gave me chills. So say that again, so he said, oh well, with your life, just help.
That's exactly what he's telling her. He's like, if you do this, if you don't do this, God's still going to raise up deliverance for the Hebrews, the Jewish people.
It's been written that the Lord.
Yes, they're going to be delivered. It's going to happen. And if you
Mordecai
don't,
was telling Esther.
yes, Mordecai's talking to Esther. And if you don't do this, the Lord will raise up somebody else to do it, and you and your father's house will be completely destroyed. He said, look, Esther, how do you know that you wasn't raised up for such a time as this? This is where we've been coming to. I knew this week was going to change things. We were raised for such a time as this.
Amen.
I've been telling you, we need to figure out who we are. You need to figure out what your spiritual identity is. It's for such a time as this. And God's going to deliver his people. He's going to have a remnant. He's going to set his people free. And the Spirit of God is going to move with or without us.
Oh, and look, and they tried to execute the president this week.
I was just thinking about that, about the man that was hit behind him. I was thinking, we keep saying God protected Trump, what she did. That man took the bullet instead. He was raised for such a time
As
as
this.
That's exactly right. Such a time as this.
Wow. That was his purpose.
Yeah. He went right into the house of God. I mean, he was right in the presence of God. Because he gave his life.
Esther, it's for such a time as this, girl. And you know what Esther told him? She said, I feel the Holy Ghost. She said, you call a fast. All the Jews need to fast 3 days and 3 nights. Me and my servants are going to fast 3 days and 3 nights. And then I'm going into the king. And she said, if I perish, I perish. I'm going to take him the message.
Amen.
Woo!
So she was willing to say, I am going to tell him I'm wrong.
She said, if I perish, I perish. I'm going to do it.
She says because she knew she had to save the people.
He didn't.
That's why all of them fasted for 3 days and 3 nights. All of everybody, including her servants.
Yes.
Because she said, I'm going to go tell him. And he'll probably kill me because I'm a Jew and I'm his wife. And they just passed this law that all the Jews had to die. Haggai had to pass this.
So in the meantime,
Haggai is not the same guy that
Haman.
raised her up. Haman. Okay, I'm sorry.
Haman. In the meantime, Haman's back out here. He goes back out in the courtyard into the gate, and there's Mordecai in sackcloth and ashes because he's fasting 3 days and 3 nights. He took his good clothes off and put his mourning clothes on, and he's fasting. And when he comes out through there, Mordecai don't even look at him. And he is mad. He is hot.
Who is? Well,
Haman.
Haman.
So he goes home, tells his wife and all of his servants about this, and his wife said, this is simple. You got to hang that guy. And so she said, go out there and build a
Noose.
huh?
A noose.
A gallows.
A gallows, yeah.
Go out there and build a gallows. You know, in the Western days, they got that platform they hang people on. She'd go out there and build one. And then you go tomorrow and tell the king what's going on. and then hang him.
This random,
His wife,
and who is this?
Haman's wife. Haman,
That's it, that's the
Okay.
title.
Haman's second in charge. Second in charge of the kingdom.
Okay, so it's the king's right hand.
Right.
Okay, I got it.
Okay, he would pass, Mordecai would not bow. So he ruled over all, everywhere, saying, kill all the Jews. Well, his wife was a Jew, so she couldn't have to die. So Mordecai said, look, you don't do something, Esther.
Yeah, I know all that.
Okay, but this guy.
So the
is
person who ordered to kill all the Jews is
Haman.
Haman,
the king's right hand.
king's right hand.
So does the king even know?
Yes, he talked the king into it because the same way the king got talked into divorcing Vashti. If you don't do this, it's going to look bad publicly.
Because the guy won't bow to me, and it's gonna make all these other people think they don't have to bow to me, if you don't do it.
Oh, goodness, it's
Yeah,
the same.
it's the same, yes,
Wow.
It's not a cycle of life. It's not a cycle of life. It's a cycle of death.
yeah.
So Haman builds the gallows. The next morning he goes into the king. Now, the night before, the king had insomnia.
What could we think?
Haman builds his gallows. He goes to bed. He's going to go to the king the next morning. That night, the king can't sleep. The king can't sleep.
Yeah.
So he sends for the recorders, and they read him. They start reading to him out of the journal of the courtyard, out of the journal of the court. On this day, this is what happened. This one was involved. And he just happened to come across the place where Mordecai had saved his life by busting out those two guys for that plot. And the king got excited. I feel the Holy Ghost. He just happened to have insomnia and just happened to come across that entry in the journal.
Oh yeah, like the Lord had nothing to do with it.
And he said, what's been done for this guy? Did he get rewarded for this? And they're like, no, nothing happened. He got nothing out of the deal. And the king said, we're going to deal with this in the morning. So in the morning, he's in his court there, and Haman's in there with him, and all the court's in there. And so he asked Haman, he said, Haman, if there was somebody the king wanted to honor, what would you have me to do for him? And so Haman's thinking, boy, I got it. It's for me. And Haman begins prophesying. He said, you give him some garments that you sit on the throne with. You give him a big portion of food. You put him in your chariot. You carry him through the city. And let everybody talk about how great he was. And the king said, good deal, Haman. And he told him, he said, now I want you to go out and find Mordecai and do that for him because he saved my life. Haman, go do it.
And Haman was gonna kill him.
Haman was going to hang him. Already got the gallows built.
Did he just look at like what?
He had to do it.
He probably
He would have killed him.
pantaloons.
Yeah, because he couldn't question the king.
Uh-uh.
Now the Lord's got a sense of humor. That's right.
So
Yeah, that is so
Haman goes out and does what he's supposed to do. He comes back in, and Esther is there. And Esther tells the king, said, tomorrow I would like for you and Haman to come. I'm gonna set a feast at home. I'd like for you to come. And the king's like, okay, we'll be there. So she sets a feast, a dinner. They go, Haman and the king goes and have dinner with Esther. And the king's like, what is it you want? What's going on? Up to half the kingdom, it's yours. And she said, what I want is for y'all to come back tomorrow one more time, and I want to have another big banquet. So they come back the second day. And while they're sitting there eating, the king's after Esther. He's like, okay, now look, tell me. This is far enough. Up to half my kingdom, what do you want? It's yours, you pretty thing.
He said, what, you pretty thing?
No, Audie said that.
Well, that's what he felt like.
That's what he felt like.
Yeah.
And she said, here's the thing. And she got, the long, droopy face and the sad thing. She said, all the Jews are going to be put to death because of what Haman said in the law that was passed on this day. And the king's like, yeah. And she said, and I'm a Jew.
So she was basically saying, I have fed you the last 2 meals because I'm going to die.
Aw.
And it made the king angry.
Wait, at her?
No.
No,
Oh.
Haman.
Ooh.
Haman.
He had his servants come in, pick Haman up, and take him out to the gallows that he built.
His own gallows.
He hung on his own gallows. I feel the Holy Ghost. Y'all listening to me? Now, listen to this. I don't know how long I've been talking, but I got to go a little longer. Now I'm freezing to death on the power of God.
Go for it, Dad. Go for it.
The name of the Lord, Yehovah, is not mentioned one time in the book of Esther. God and his name is not mentioned one time in the book of Esther.
But he's all over it.
But he's all over it. They're in captivity. They're in bondage. They've lost their religion. They've lost their nation. And God's not mentioned in that heathen land. And yet he's there taking care of his people.
Like America.
Which means you don't have to be written, you don't have to
Just
see
what's
it
happening in the
or
world.
anything, he's still there.
Just like what's happening to the world.
Bingo.
Wow, that was a good one.
And yet the church would have thrown Esther out in a heartbeat. And yet if the Lord had not set it up and let her go in to sleep with that king and become queen, and had not given that king insomnia that night, all the Jewish people would have been exterminated.
Wow.
Trump has not turned his head yesterday.
He said this morning, he said, only God prevented the unthinkable from happening.
Yeah, because if he wouldn't have turned his head, it would have hit him right in the side of his head. It would have shot him.
Here's the thing.
God is in.
There's confusion. There's all around us. We don't know what's going on. We don't know where the next meal's coming from. And we can't even seem to find God in the middle of it. He's nowhere in the book of Esther by name. And yet look what he did by moving through people.
Move aside
And yet when the Lord tells me to call and check on somebody and tell them that I love them and I miss them, I'm not even going to call them.
Oh, no.
So you don't know what you were raised up to be if you're not listening.
That's what he's been telling us. We've got to know who we are.
We need to find our identity because it's for such an hour as this. And if I perish, I perish.
It's so, okay, so when I worked at Hertz, which now that I work at Dun & Bradstreet, for me to talk to this particular person, her name's Jocelyn, Hertz should have paid $40,000 to $50,000 for her to talk to me. She sat a weekly call with me the whole time I was at Hertz for 10 years. She's a full-blooded Jew. And she still talks to me at Dun & Bradstreet. And she said, do not tell your boss that I'm behind the scenes because she teaches me everything I know. She said, I don't know what it is about me. Oh, it's okay. She says, I don't know what it is about me, but I'm so drawn. And she's a Hungarian.
Hey, won't you go let the donkeys out? It's time for them to eat. Rachel, Bill, y'all okay?
Oh, man, I'm pretty, it's awesome. I've had chills through most of the message. Yes, it's been very good.
About whole Moses is in.
Let Papa finish.
Yes.
Okay, Dad, we got to know who we are.
Y'all don't have no words? You're like stunned or what?
We're cogitating.